Hello everybody, so here is Luna Delir again, and I'm here to talk to you about ESTP, Heath Ledger versus ISTP, Paul Bettany. Bettany, I think that's the right pronunciation. Anyway, I chose these two celebrities, in particular because there are interviews out there that show their temperament and their behavior very clearly. And plus I enjoy their style of acting a lot, so I wanted to give a tribute to Heath Ledger and talk about Paul Bettany also. So ESTP versus ISTP. The first thing that I want to say about these two types is that the greatest difference you find is that one of the two types is a rational, the other is an irrational. And that's the split that socionics makes. In socionics, we do not have the same split that there is in MBTI, but I think it's clearer and it explains better how the types actually work. So ISTPs, TI, SE, having TI as dominant function are a rational type, whereas ESTPs, extroverted sensing, introverted thinking, are an irrational type. What is the difference between being a rational and being an irrational? Rational types are more, I don't know how to say it. Well, irrational types are more relaxed, have a more wait-and-see attitude, whereas rational types are more at the ready, more rigid, and have a more stiff type of behavior. They're more rigid in how they think and how they behave. One thing that we can notice is that ISTPs tend to be Prussian and have a very Prussian and therefore dictatorial, so to speak, kind of leadership, whereas ESTPs tend to be a little bit, even though they have this strong extroverted sensing, they have a more democratic and relaxed style of behavior, style of leadership, They tend to be a little bit more democratic. So extroverted sensing dominant types way to impose their will is a little bit more subtle and a little bit more subdued than the style of creative extroverted sensing types. And that's exactly because their dominant function and their main approach is smooth and very perceptive. That's how we can consider sensing and intuitive are very perceptive functions. And socionics actually considers them perceptive functions. So that's the first thing that we can say. The main split we see in how they behave, they are very different types actually, but from nuances. So if ISTPs look on one hand more comfortable in public, they tend to have a more elegant but relaxed attitude in public. ESTPs, on the other hand, tend to look a little bit more tense. If you'll watch the two interviews that I put in the description below of Heath Ledger and Paul Bettany, you can see that Heath Ledger has this kind of weird attitude in which it looks and it's clear that he's feeling uncomfortable with the people that are interviewing him, and it's not a personal thing. It's not something personal that he's feeling towards the person. It's really an attitude that derives from his sense of the weakness of his feeling functions. ESTPs have FE in the tertiary position and introvert feeling vulnerable. This means that these two functions are in ESTPs particularly weak. Whereas when it comes to ISTPs, they are, yes, weak, but introvert feeling can be used by an ISTP, and to an extent they are more comfortable in the use of their introvert feeling, and that's why they look so much more elegant and at the same time confident, because they do not have the same vulnerability as and the same weakness of the ESTP instead. We can see another thing about the feeling functions, that is the approach of extrovert feeling in ISTPs instead. In the interview I put in the description with Bettany, when he talks about being in a pub. He likes environments and atmospheres in which he feels at home and he's embraced as part of the environment. That's a need that ISTPs have, and that's also how ENFJs make ISTPs feel comfortable, and that's by having this embracing attitude that makes them feel more at home. Whereas ESTPs, on the other hand, need to be drawn and to be pulled closer, to be held to feel more comfortable, because as you can see in the attitude of Heath in the interview I leave in the description below, he is really uncomfortable in social environment. Another thing that we can see is that Bettany has more of an in-depth analysis kind of style. He tends to look at things in depth and shows very little facial expressions and very little emphasis in what he's talking about. He's very professional and he looks in depth into things. Whereas Heath Ledger, in talking about his interest in acting and how he reads the scripts and stuff, has a more human kind of behavior, a more human kind of attitude, meaning that he tends to express more his passionate side, his emotional side. You can also see that Bettany has a very Prussian behavior, meaning that he stands still, stiff, and he doesn't move much, whereas Heath Ledger, he's a little bit more on the relaxed side. And that's because some think that ISTPs are type A kind of type, whereas ESTPs are type B kind of type. If you want to look into it, it's more or less what we were talking about. And anyway, these are a little bit the big differences. In general, Heath Ledger has more an attitude by which it shows that he can move people according to his needs and his requirements. It shows that people around him, the people that are actually interviewing him, are respectful of his needs and his priorities, and that's a specific trait of extrovert sensing. Extrovert sensing in Heath Ledger shows also in the fact that when in that specific interview he's asked about he's living in Florence, if I don't go wrong, or anyway, he's living in the town, he remembers exactly how the roads were disposed and how they squared and where more or less he was living, and he has a very visual memory of the place where he was living. If you look into the Rick DeLong description, short description of functions, you will see that how objects are located in space is specifically an extroverted sensing ability. So that's also one way ESTPs help INFJs, because INFJs tend to have a need to be explained things in detail when it comes to moving from one place to the other or stuff like that. Anyway, direction, that kind of stuff, INFJs need, and INTJs, as far as I know, also need a more detailed description of the environment around them, which is instead not the same for ENFJs. ENFJs do not appreciate too much detailed descriptions of the environment around them, because they want to an extent to have access to it. And this makes us talk about ISTPs instead, who give a glimpse and an idea of more or less what the environment around them could look like, and that you can see in the interview with the Paul Bettany, because he's describing environments, but in a more superficial and kind of not so in-depth kind of way. So that's because he's using X-ray sensing creative, so he gives a rough idea, but not too much detail about it. So ESTP's Heath Ledger ability to use X-ray sensing for other people, ISTP's ability to be creative with X-ray sensing and help other people imagine what the environment more or less looks like. We can see TI in the way the two types think, in the logic behind their thinking, and in how they describe things and situations. They're clearly thinker types, and they describe things from a very subjective logic point of view. There are parts in both interviews in which you can see them explain things from their subjective logic and their personal point of view and their personal idea of how things are. One thing that I find really interesting in the interview with Heath Ledger is that there is a passage in which he shows the extrovert thinking demonstrative, and that's when he describes the script and he describes the work. That part there, if you notice, is very extrovert thinking, and Heath Ledger is using it without giving it too much importance, but he's using it to make his point, and that's exactly how ESTPs use extrovert thinking. Introvert sensing in Paul Bettany unluckily doesn't show that much, but that's because ISTPs tend to use introvert sensing with short glimpses, and they don't really give it too much importance. Moreover, in socionics terms, Heath Ledger is the TI subtype, which means his thinking area is particularly strong, and Paul Bettany is also the TI subtype, which means that his sensing functions, his creative function and demonstrative function are not that strong. The reason why I had to pick these two people, is that it's really difficult to find an ISTP that is not the TI subtype. They're extremely rare and difficult to find, so it would be really difficult to actually find someone to describe this way. Socionists say that Seth Green is the SE subtype, but I never had a chance to actually type him myself, so I will not use him in the videos until I'm persuaded myself of what socionists say. That's because most socionists do not agree with each other, so I want to have my perspective of things. So I think I will close this here, and I gave you a rough idea of how these two types work and what the differences between them are from a real life perspective with celebrities. I hope it helped, and I will talk to you soon. Bye!